In late June of 1862, amidst the 7 Days battles, Lincoln issued a new army as a result of Major General George B. McClellan's bungling and retreating before Richmond. Robert E. Lee, commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, along with Stonewall Jackson's forces, attacked McClellan's siege positions outside of Richmond and were driving them back. Lincoln decided that this new army would be called the Army of Virginia. This army would consist of Union forces in Northern Virginia, including the armies of John C. Fremont, Nathaniel Banks, and Irvin McDowell. Lincoln assigned Major General John Pope to command the army. John Pope was a graduate of West Point and a breveted veteran of the Mexican War who had recently come to prominence as a result of his capture of Island No. 10 on the Mississippi River. Pope brought to the East a reputation for bold and aggressive leadership. Once Pope took command, he immediately assembled the army with exceptional speed. With soldiers from Washington and portions of the Army of the Potomac, Fremont's command, at that time called the Mountain Department, would be assigned as the First Corps of the Army of Virginia. Nathaniel Banks's forces would become the Army's Second Corps, formerly the Department of the Shenandoah, and lastly, General McDowell's would be reorganized into the Third Corps. Rufus King, however, relieved General Fremont of his command due to the general's uproar at being replaced by Pope. King would be promoted to command of the First Corps, but declined and handed over the command to Franz Sigel, a German immigrant and abolitionist. Because of this rearrangement, McDowell's Third Corps would contain the largest numbers of soldiers in the army. The brigade would be reassigned to the Third Corps. As Lee was beating back McClellan's offensive in the 7 Days battles, scouting was in motion by the Army's cavalry to ascertain whether Confederate forces would be in position as a result of their new one at Richmond. King ordered his cavalry to keep a close eye on the fords of the Rappahannock River, but as a result, there was no news from his scouting parties, but slaves reported Ewell at Gordonsville with a small Confederate force. As the cavalry under King was gathering information, the brigade and General Gibbon focused on other matters. Celebrations occurred on the 4th of July. The brigade celebrated with games, horse races, foot races, and a sack race. Officers and men participated indiscriminately, with regiment competing against regiment, and everybody pitching in to try to catch a greased pig. But after this diversion, the soldiers again began to chafe under the routine of camp life. Pope, after taking command of the army, made a proclamation where he, in the long run, decided to make a pompous remark to the soldiers that his forces always drove back the Confederates in the Western Theater, and as a result, insulted the honor and courage of the soldiers, including the brigade. Pope's words would come back to bite him. Rufus Dawes wrote in his journal in reaction to Pope's proclamation, quote, "General Pope's bombastic proclamation has not tended to increase confidence. Indeed, the effect is exactly the contrary. For the present, I do not anticipate that we will move from Fredericksburg. I think General Pope does not reinforce us here for fear of General Jackson in the valley. Of course, we felt eager to be something more than ornamental file closers." Dawes was not the only one expressing this attitude. John Gibbon also expressed that his men were not meant to be left in camp. While the brigade awaited orders, Gibbon instituted new disciplinary measures regarding the equipment that was thrown to the wayside on their previous march to Falmouth. Officers, as well as soldiers, would be held responsible and charged with wasting or throwing their equipment away. Camp life, however, would remain the same for the time being. While encamped near the Lacey House at Falmouth, they were also encamped as if to be prepared for any enemy offensive. Alan T. Nolan describes this. A chain of sentinels was placed around the camp, and officers of the day and officers of the guard were detailed and instructed. The entire brigade was also ordered to turn out under arms at reveille. As soon as the drums ceased beating, the companies were to move out at double quick and form on the colors. Gibbon mounted, galloped through the camp, and inspected each regiment and then dismissed it. Private William Ray of the 7th Wisconsin described the training in his journal. Battalion drill this evening in presence of General Gibbon. The rumors was that he wanted to observe the movements of both, and the best drilled was to take the right of the brigade, but this is only a rumor as of yet. As the brigade kept drilling and training that summer, the war so far was not going well for the Union or President Lincoln. George McClellan and the Army of the Potomac were stuck on Harrison's Landing after their retreat after the 7 Days battles. Lincoln, however, recognized that the cause and character of the war were changing. McClellan's way of defeating the Confederacy was not working. It would no longer be a, quote, gentleman's war as McClellan wanted it to be, specifically on the issue of civilian property, slavery. McClellan, a conservative Democrat, believed that going after slavery would not win the war, and as a result, drive the border states of Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri out of the Union. Lincoln appointed Pope, believing that his aggressive attitude in the Western theater would increase pressure in the East. According to David Herbert Donald's biography of Lincoln, quote, Pope took up his command and immediately made it clear that, unlike McClellan, he would not fight a soft war. Pope ordered his soldiers so far as possible to live on the country they were passing through. Lincoln would also change his policy regarding slavery. When the first shots were fired in 1861, as Donald again describes Lincoln, Senator Charles Sumner had gone to the White House to remind the president that emancipation of the slaves of a military opponent fell within his war powers. While on a carriage ride to the funeral of Edwin Stanton's son, Lincoln told Secretary of State William Seward and Secretary of the Treasury Salmon Chase that he would free the slaves or be ourselves defeated. Lincoln, in the War Department telegraph office, would write the Emancipation Proclamation, but waited to present it to the cabinet. Time would come swiftly because of McClellan's retreat during the 7 days battles, plus with the despair of the soldiers and officers, as well as anti-slavery opinion in the North and the dwindling trickle of volunteers for the Army. Lincoln needed momentum so he could present the proclamation to his cabinet, and he didn't have to wait long. The passage on July 17, 1862 by Congress, the Second Confiscation Act, a measure that defined the rebels as traitors and ordered the confiscation of their property, including the freeing of the slaves. Senator William Fessenden, working closely with the president, secured modification of some of the more stringent provisions did Lincoln agree to sign the measure. This act created great momentum, and as a result, the act was followed by Lincoln's conversation with Seward and Chase. Lincoln convened the cabinet on July 22nd to present the proclamation. Lincoln presented the proclamation to the cabinet. He would free the slaves on January 1st, 1863. If the southern states did not come back into the Union, Lincoln would only free slaves in states that were in rebellion against the Union, but left the border states that had slaves alone. He knew the cost of the proclamation, and his advisors talked about the economic implications regarding cotton, losing the elections in the fall, and forcing the border states to join the Confederacy. On the other hand, Secretary Seward supported the proclamation, but told Lincoln that to issue it now looked like a sign of desperation, and to quote Seward, "It's like our last shriek on the retreat," because of the many battlefield defeats the Union was suffering at that time. And with the cabinet divided, and as a result not reaching a decision, Lincoln, acting on the advice of Seward and also sensing it, Lincoln put the document away until Union victory was realized. Rufus King's cavalry continued to gather information from slaves as well as scouts to determine Confederate forces in the area. Pope, upon hearing of King's actions, complimented his efforts. Pope had another purpose for this as well. Pope believed there was a significant development of Confederate forces near Gordonsville. King, with orders from Pope, went to General Gibbon to take a mixed column of cavalry, infantry, and artillery toward Orange Courthouse, north of Gordonsville, on the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, with the 2nd and 6th Wisconsin as part of his infantry. Gibbon proceeded on the 24th of July down the Orange Plank Road, passing through Chancellorsville and skirmishing lightly with the Confederate cavalry to within a mile and a half of Orange Courthouse. Gibbon, as a result, would withdraw from the area due to the heavy concentration of Confederate forces there. General Gibbon, along with the 2nd and the 6th, suffered no casualties and gave valuable information to General King as well as to General Pope. This information would be crucial because, apparently concerned of King's previous threats against the railroad, the Confederates had sent Jackson from Richmond to Gordonsville. The 2nd and the 6th, along with their other Union forces, returned to Falmouth on July 27th. Gibbon would congratulate both the 2nd and the 6th for their effort in the raid. Major Rufus Dawes of the 6th Wisconsin wrote in his journal describing the raid, with a very personal up-close encounter with slavery. Quote, "When we were at the front, an old Negro slave came in the middle of the night to our picket line. He said that Massa Bullock, a lieutenant in the rebel army, was in a house a mile away. I took 40 men, surrounded the house, and captured him. He was a fine young scion of a first family of Virginia. He was not in uniform, and he denied my right to take him as a soldier. When and Dawes uses a racial slur to describe the slave, identified him, he asked me if I would, quote, take the word of and the Confederate officer uses the N-word to describe the slave. But when I proposed that he take the oath of allegiance, he said that I might take a horse to water, but I could not make him drink. I brought the gentleman in as a prisoner of war. The colored man who came to our picket line was very old. I felt suspicious of a trap and questioned him closely as to his motives in making such disclosures. He said, 'For God, massa, we knows yous as our friends. It's the Lord's will that the colored folks help yous.'" Many soldiers from the 2nd and 6th Wisconsin experienced slavery firsthand. Abolitionism was not as prevalent in the Midwest as it was in the East, and not all the soldiers of the brigade were abolitionists. For many of the men of the brigade, including Dawes, William Ray, and others, this, along with other upcoming raids, would be the first time they would witness slavery. Not every soldier was enthusiastic about freeing slaves. Quote, "The fugitives came into the camps in droves, telling the soldiers that the war was being fought to free them. One Wisconsin soldier fumed to his sister, 'The more I see of them, the more I hate them. I wish that and he uses the N-word, a soldier used the N-word here, describes slaves, lovers in Boston were down here and had to take charge of them.' Most soldiers were free soilers who opposed slavery but did not want to compete with black labor. Despite this, they saw the plantations on the march, they saw the slave cabins, and they listened to the stories of slaves being tortured, whipped, or hunted down. Many of the soldiers of the brigade volunteered to preserve the Union, not to end slavery. But now, with the experience of seeing slavery firsthand, just like Dawes, it would leave a lasting impression on the minds of the soldiers and officers. They witnessed slavery, and as a result, some of them became abolitionists who would fight to preserve the Union and end slavery. Many soldiers became abolitionists right away and immediately. Some in the brigade were abolitionists, especially among German and Norwegian immigrants of the brigade. Historian Jeffrey Wirtz states, quote, "While nearly a quarter of all Union troops in the war were foreign-born, 1/2 of the Wisconsin and Indiana men were immigrants. Germans and Irishmen comprised the largest segments, with handfuls of Scandinavians, British, Canadian, and Welsh in the ranks. These immigrant soldiers grew up in Europe, where Enlightenment beliefs taught of the equality of mankind and abolitionism. When it came to the Iron Brigade, every soldier and officer had their belief about whether slavery should be the aim of the war and were all men created equal. They all believed in preserving the Union, but now with these experiences of slavery, as well as their fellow immigrant comrades' abolitionist beliefs, ending slavery became essential and as crucial as preserving the Union, especially for the immigrant soldiers who called the United States home and fought to defend it." Days after the raid, General King's division were ordered by Pope to move the division out of Fredericksburg as soon as he was reinforced. Henry Halleck became General-in-Chief of all United States forces and ordered McClellan to leave the peninsula. As a result, a decision created an urgent mission for Pope's army to prevent a concentration against McClellan during the evacuation. Pope then decided to up the pressure by attacking Confederate communication and disrupting the development of Confederate forces in the area. On August 5th, the Frederick Hall raid opened, the most extensive of the communication raids up to that time. The objective was the interruption of the Virginia Central Railroad at Frederick Hall Station, south of the North Anna River. The brigade was to lead the raid, but there was something more important here. This campaign was officially the first time the brigade would fight together as one unit. Early in the morning, the raid got underway at 2 a.m. as the men moved out of their Falmouth camps in the darkness, crossed the river, and passed through Fredericksburg. Gibbon then decided to split his force, the 6th Wisconsin with a group of cavalry and artillery, and moved along the familiar orange plank road toward Chancellorsville. Gibbon and the other 3 regiments, accompanied by the 3rd Indiana Cavalry and a Rhode Island battery, took the Telegraph Road. As in previous marches, this march became unbearably hot and muggy. Men would collapse due to the intense Virginia heat. Adding to the heat, the brigade would witness their first action. 15 miles south of Fredericksburg, at the town of Thornburg, Gibbon was met by a Confederate cavalry force. Gibbon ordered the 6th Commander, Colonel Lysander Cutler, to move out, but to do so with discretion. As they moved, however, the Confederates withdrew just as they saw them. However, due to this intense heat, Gibbon's column was effectively halted for the day by the heat, which had prostrated many of his men. The following morning, Gibbon moved forward again, leaving 70 casualties from the heat. But their advantage of surprise was blown. Cavalry sent word that General Jeb Stuart was advancing by the Bowling Green Road on his left with a strong force. All possibility of General Gibbon's force surprising the enemy was gone, and he moved his troops to the Spotsylvania Road. Colonel Cutler's other forces, along with the 6th Wisconsin, decided to retreat, with the rest of the brigade covering the withdrawal. Skirmishing would result, and as a result, the brigade would be exchanging shots with the Confederates so that Cutler and the rest of the unit could retreat. Cutler and his forces, along with the 6th, were able to retreat and encamp for the night. Rufus Dawes wrote, "Our column had reached a place called Mount Pleasant, 15 or 20 miles from the railroad. Here, at 11 o'clock at night, a courier from General Gibbon caught us sound asleep in bivouac. General Gibbon sent by his courier to Colonel Cutler the facts of the situation and directed him to act according to his judgment." What were those judgments Gibbon mentioned to Cutler? And here's the scenario. Because of the retreat, Cutler outlined the facts to his officers. They were isolated from Gibbon's supporting column and had already met the enemy. Ahead of them was the North Anna River, which could not be forded, and south of which they could be trapped if the few wooden bridges were burned. Frederick Hall Station, their destination, was 7 miles beyond the river. Cutler decided to call a meeting with the officers representing the infantry, cavalry, and artillery. Rufus Dawes, who was one of the officers representing the men of the 6th, described the meeting in his memoir. Colonel Cutler explained that we were many miles in advance of our supporting column, and that General Stuart, with a force estimated at 5,000 men, was behind us. The main force under General Gibbon had abandoned the effort to reach the railroad. The question was, should we go on and attempt to destroy the railroad as originally proposed, taking our chances of peril in front and rear, or should we fall back upon General Gibbon's force, which was waiting for us? Cutler and the officers agreed to move forward, but to move immediately and not waste a single moment. With the decision made, Cutler sent his column forward at 2 a.m. Because of a guide's mistake, the men marched an extra 10 miles and did not reach Carl's Bridge on the North Anna until 8 a.m. There, 155 exhausted men and a company of cavalry were left under Captain Philip Plummer of the 6th Wisconsin, charged with protecting the bridge for the retreat. The force would then cross the bridge. Once the forces was 2 miles outside Frederick Hall Station, Cutler decided that now was the time to strike the railroad. Cutler sent forward the cavalry, who swooped into the village, cut the telegraph wires, picketed the roads, and began destruction of the railroad. The infantry and artillery moved in at 4:30 p.m., posting the guns as to command the village, and with the greater portion of the infantry disposed so as to defend against attack, the remainder joined the cavalry in destroying the railroad and burning whiskey and corn belonging to the Confederate Army. By 6 p.m., 2 miles of railroad had been destroyed, and the work was done. The column immediately undertook its retreat, reaching the river without mishap. After crossing, the bridge was destroyed, and the exhausted column, having marched 32 to 30 miles since 2 a.m., staggered 2 more miles into camp. Gibbon sent Cutler another dispatch, this time informing him of Stuart's presence and the risk of canceling the operation, but there would be no further discussion in time to continue it. As a result, at 4:30 a.m., Cutler's column again set out, heading for Spotsylvania Courthouse, where Gibbon's force was to be waiting. 2 miles beyond Spotsylvania, Cutler's men met Gibbon's, and the exhausted men of the 6th rejoined their Wisconsin and Indiana brethren. The reunited column then camped for the night and returned to Fredericksburg on August 8th. The 6th Wisconsin, as a result, marched 90 miles in the unforgiving midsummer Virginia heat. And also in 3 days and a half, however, Gibbon had to report the loss of 59 men from his brigade. The exhausted men from the 2nd and 7th Wisconsin and the 19th Indiana, who had straggled on the 6th and 7th and who were captured by Stuart. Their first action together as a unit ended, and many, like the previous marching, would also reflect on the grueling experience. They would need the rest, along with fellow soldiers. The others had learned a lesson to straggle was to be lost. Except for the 6th Wisconsin, the entire brigade had now seen the enemy, fired at him, and received his fire. They did not realize that the brigade started a new campaign to get after the Confederates after the 7 days. The second Bull Run campaign had begun, and the men, officers, and others of the brigade would be getting their first taste of combat very soon.